What if I told you that most of what you call love is actually unresolved childhood trauma wearing perfume? That your most intense relationships are not divine destiny, but psychological traps your shadow set? Carl Jung saw this coming, and what he said about love and attachment was so raw it was never aired. They silenced it. Not because it wasn't true, but because it was too true, too disturbing, too revealing. In an unreleased interview never meant for the public, Carl Jung went beyond psychology and into the darkest crevices of love. He didn't just speak of attraction and bonding, he spoke of obsession, projection, and why we mistake pain for passion. He warned that the people we fall hardest for are rarely the ones who heal us. They're the ones who reveal us, not our light, our shadow. And unless you've faced that shadow, you will confuse chemistry with chaos. You'll keep calling it love, while slowly self-destructing. Jung said it plainly. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. In love, this means every unmet need from childhood, every silent scream you swallowed, every ounce of unworthiness buried beneath the smile, becomes the architect of who you desire. You're not falling in love, you're falling into familiarity. This is why you can't let them go, even when they hurt you, even when they don't show up, because they fit the emotional mold you're used to. They mirror the parent who was distant, critical, or conditional with their love. And in that mirror, you try to rewrite your own story. You try to finally win the love you never got. But here's the trap Jung exposed. You're not loving them. You're trying to heal yourself through them. And that is not love. That is emotional projection. He called it the lover's illusion, the fantasy we create around someone, not based on who they are, but based on who we want them to be for us. You say, I just feel this deep connection. But often what you're feeling is your own shadow, pulling you in. You're not drawn to them, you're drawn to the wound they activate. That's the part most people never realize. Jung said, where love rules, there is no will to power, and where power predominates, their love is lacking. And when you're addicted to someone emotionally, what you're really seeking is power over the pain, over the abandonment, over the ache of not being enough. In that banned interview, Jung described love not as a safe, glowing warmth, but as a battlefield between your soul and your shadow. He said that true intimacy doesn't begin until the projection collapses, until you stop seeing them as your savior and start seeing them as they are, flawed, human, incapable of rescuing you from your past. Most people never get there. They stay in the illusion. They fall in love with the role, not the person, the one who will finally make them feel chosen, seen, worthy. But that isn't their job. It never was. And when they fail to meet that expectation, as they inevitably will, you feel betrayed, not because they changed, but because the illusion shattered. Jung knew this was coming. He predicted the modern epidemic of anxious attachment, trauma bonding, and romantic codependency long before we had names for them. He warned that love without consciousness is not love. It's entanglement. You don't know where you end, and the other begins. You mistake emotional volatility for passion. You call it chemistry when it's really cortisol, adrenaline, fight or flight, survival mode. He said, every form of addiction is bad, no matter whether the narcotic be alcohol, morphine, or idealism, and that includes the addiction to fantasy, the addiction to being saved, the addiction to feeling needed, even when it's destroying you. So what happens when you start to wake up? When you realize that the person you couldn't live without is actually the one you were using to avoid yourself? That's when the real pain begins, because now you're no longer chasing them. You're facing the emptiness they were covering, and that emptiness is not romantic. It's ancient. It's the original wound, the part of you that decided you weren't enough unless someone else validated your existence. Jung didn't just want us to understand this. He wanted us to feel it, to recognize that the real journey is not toward another person. It's inward. That the deepest form of love is not connection, but integration. The unification of your conscious self with your hidden self, the light and the dark, the hope and the hunger, the angel and the animal. He said that to love truly is to carry the burden of the other's soul as if it were your own. But how can you do that if you've never met your own soul? If your love is just a performance, a negotiation, a plea for safety, that's why most relationships fail. Not because love isn't real, but because most people haven't met themselves deeply enough to love from a grounded place. They're still acting out their childhood scripts, unconsciously assigning roles: rescuer, victim, villain, redeemer. It's not a relationship, it's a reenactment. And here's the rawest truth Jung revealed, the one that got the interview pulled from public release. He said that until we confront the shadow side of love, we will continue to confuse possession with partnership. We will demand loyalty where we've given none to ourselves. We will expect others to fill our void and then blame them when they can't, because in the end, every love story is a mirror. And sometimes, what breaks your heart isn't what they did. It's what you see in yourself when the mirror cracks. And that's where most people stop, when the mirror cracks, when the projection fades, when the fantasy dies. They call it heartbreak, but Jung saw it differently. He saw it as initiation, the painful tearing away of illusion, forcing you to stand face to face with yourself, not the version you show the world, but the part you kept hidden even from yourself. This is where real love begins. Not when you find someone who completes you, but when you realize you were never broken to begin with. The other person didn't hurt you. They revealed the wound that was already there. They pressed where you were already bleeding. They didn't betray you. They activated the betrayal you never healed from. Jung called this the sacred wound, a moment where the soul cries out for wholeness, not through another, but through integration. Because love is not about merging into one being, it's about standing whole beside someone who is also whole. Anything else is fusion, and fusion is fire. It consumes everything until there's nothing left but ash and regret. Jung said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." But transformation is not always gentle. Sometimes it burns, sometimes it shatters, sometimes it leaves you gasping for air because the version of you that entered the relationship no longer exists. That's why people feel lost after love ends. Not because the person is gone, but because the identity that was built around them has collapsed. The us you believed in no longer exists. And now you're forced to rebuild the me you abandoned. This is where the shadow does its work. In the silence. In the ache. In the moments when you ask, who am I without them? That's the real question. Because love doesn't just show you who someone else is, it shows you everything you have forgotten about yourself. But here's the danger. If you don't learn the lesson, you'll repeat it. You'll find someone new with a different face, but the same energy. You'll recreate the same drama, the same pain, because the shadow hasn't been integrated. It's still calling the shots behind the scenes. That's why Jung warned, the shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality, for no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort. That effort, facing your own darkness, your own patterns, is the hardest part of healing. It's easier to blame them, to call them toxic, to label them narcissist. But Jung would ask, why did you stay? What in you was so desperate to be seen that you tolerated the intolerable? What part of you needed their chaos to feel alive? That's the question people avoid, because the answer leads inward, to the roots, to the original abandonment. The first time you felt invisible. The first time love came with conditions. The first time affection was withheld, used as leverage. That's where your blueprint was written. And that's what you've been reenacting in adult relationships ever since. Until you break the cycle. Jung believed that the shadow was not evil, it was simply unrecognized, and love, more than any other human experience, brings it to the surface. That's why you feel so out of control when you fall in love. It's not just attraction, it's your unconscious crying out, "Maybe this time I'll be healed." But healing doesn't come from another person. It comes from confronting the parts of yourself you buried to be loved. You buried your anger, your grief, your jealousy, your longing, all so you'd be accepted. And now those parts show up in your relationships, not as truth, but as sabotage. You get triggered, you become clingy, you pull away, you test them. You punish them for what others did to you. Not because you're cruel, but because your shadow doesn't know how else to protect you. So what did Jung advise? Radical honesty. With yourself first, to sit with the discomfort, to track your reactions, to notice where your love becomes control, where your fear dresses up as desire, to name the patterns, not just in others, but in you, especially in you. He said, "We cannot change anything unless we accept it." That includes your attachment style, your coping mechanisms, your fear of being alone, your tendency to overgive or withdraw or perform just to feel worthy. All of it must be brought into the light. That's why the real work after a breakup isn't about moving on. It's about moving into the silence, into the ache, into the question, why did I believe I needed them to be whole? That question alone can unravel decades of illusion. It can unearth a lifetime of suppressed truth. Because in the end, love is not about who you attract. It's about what you're attracting them with. Your wounds or your wholeness? If it's wounds, it will feel like fire. If it's wholeness, it will feel like home. And Jung's final warning in that banned conversation was haunting. He said that people will run from the pain of self-awareness their entire lives, jumping from lover to lover, blaming others for their heartbreak until they one day realize, too late, that all they ever wanted was to be seen by the one person they kept abandoning, themselves. He paused then and said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But it's also the most liberating, because when you stop needing someone else to fix you, you stop bleeding on people who didn't cut you. You stop chasing closure in conversations that were never going to give it. You stop trying to prove your worth and start living from it." That's the revolution Jung wanted. A world where love wasn't a drug or a performance, but a mirror, a conscious act of two people, seeing each other as they are, not as they wish each other to be. No masks, no projections, no roles, just truth, just presence, just love in its rawest, rarest form. But few are brave enough to love that way, because real love, the kind that sees through you, not around you, demands your full presence. It requires that you be naked, not just in body, but in soul. And that kind of exposure terrifies most people. Jung understood this. He said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And nowhere is that more true than in relationships. We lie to ourselves. We romanticize toxicity. We cling to chaos because it feels familiar. We say it's passion. We say it's fate. But often, it's just unhealed trauma meeting unhealed trauma in disguise. Think about how many times you've said, "I can't let go of them." But was it them? Or was it the story you built around them? The dream of finally being loved in the way you always needed. The idea that maybe, just maybe, this time it wouldn't end in pain. That hope is intoxicating. It's also dangerous, because it keeps you trapped in cycles that look like love but feel like war. Jung warned us that the unconscious, when ignored, will run your life, and you'll call it fate. You'll think you're cursed in love. You'll think there's something wrong with you. But in reality, it's just the shadow calling you home. Over and over, through heartbreak, through disappointment, through the ache of unmet expectations, until you finally stop looking outward and start listening inward. That's where the transformation begins. Not when you find the one, but when you realize you are the one you've been waiting for, the one who can hold your grief, the one who can validate your needs, the one who can choose peace over performance, the one who doesn't need someone else to complete them because they've already come home to themselves. Jung spoke about this homecoming as individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming who you truly are, not who you were told to be, not who you became to survive, but who you are when all the masks fall. And love, especially painful love, accelerates that process. It breaks down everything that's false so what's real can finally emerge. But that emergence isn't always pretty. Sometimes it looks like solitude. Sometimes it looks like walking away from people who once felt like home. Sometimes it looks like sitting alone in a dark room, grieving not just the loss of a person, but the version of yourself that died with them. That's sacred work. That's the soul reclaiming its power. Jung would say that every heartbreak is an invitation, a rupture through which your unconscious material rises to the surface. Your fears, your longings, your projections, and most importantly, your forgotten self. The one who existed before you were wounded, before you learned to beg for love with silence or self-sacrifice, before you dimmed your light so others wouldn't feel insecure. That self is still in there, waiting, watching, whispering, and it's through the unraveling of unhealthy attachment that you finally hear its voice. Because when attachment dies, truth is born. The truth that you were always worthy. The truth that love isn't earned, it's allowed. The truth that no relationship, no matter how intense, can define your value. And once you know that, truly know it, you'll never settle again. Not for breadcrumbs, not for games, not for half-hearted love wrapped in pretty lies. You'll stop confusing chemistry with compatibility. You'll stop thinking love is supposed to hurt. You'll stop idolizing people who invalidate you, and you'll start creating space for peace, for authenticity, for relationships rooted in reality, not fantasy. That was Jung's final insight in that now lost conversation. He said, "Most people don't want love. They want relief. Relief from loneliness, from emptiness, from themselves. But love is not anesthesia. It's not supposed to numb you. It's supposed to wake you up. And if it hurts, it's because something false is being burned away." The question is, will you stay in the fire long enough to be reborn? Most don't. They run back to distractions, to rebound relationships, to self-soothing through fantasy or addiction or denial. But some sit in the ashes. They wait, they listen, they face the mirror, and slowly, painfully, beautifully, they rise, not as someone new, but as someone real. That's the gift of the shadow. It breaks you to remake you. It strips away everything you are not so that what remains is undeniable, unshakable truth. And once you taste that kind of clarity, every other form of love feels counterfeit. You no longer need love to rescue you. You choose it consciously, without fear. You become magnetic to partners who are also whole, also awake. And that's when love becomes what it was always meant to be. Not a distraction from yourself, but a celebration of it. Carl Jung never wanted us to be perfect. He wanted us to be whole. And love, he believed, was the alchemical fire that could lead us there. If we were willing to feel everything, to embrace the darkness, not just the light, to welcome the pain, not just the pleasure, to love not as addiction, but as awakening. So if you're in the ache right now, if you're grieving someone who felt like the center of your world, remember, it's not the end. It's the initiation. It's the call to stop outsourcing your self-worth and start reclaiming your soul. The shadow side of love was never meant to destroy you. It was meant to reveal you. And now, you know.